Hey guys, tonight we step into a stone-cold corridor, damp with centuries of breath, where your bare feet slap against icy flagstones before you even realize you're awake. Somewhere, a bell tolls. Not a pleasant wind chime on the porch kind of bell, but a throat-rattling clang that shakes loose your last dream and replaces it with obligation. You're a nun. It's 213 in the morning, and that means it's time to pray. Again. You stretch your arms, stiff from hours curled beneath a thin wool blanket, and try not to trip over your habit in the dark. The air smells like beeswax, moss, and a hint of regret. No one's talking. No one ever talks before matins. The only thing louder than the bell is your heartbeat as you follow a flickering candle through the abbey toward the chapel. You pass a statue of the Virgin Mary that always seems to be judging your posture. She probably is. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Especially if it's after midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is something like 1180, and you're somewhere in northern France. Outside, it's so dark, it might as well be the end of the world. Inside, you shuffle along behind Sister Beatrice, whose job it is to wake everyone for the night prayers. She carries a bell, but honestly, she doesn't even need it. Her heavy footsteps are punishment enough. And this is your life. Every night, every single night, you get jolted out of sleep at impossible hours to chant Latin in unison, often with more phlegm than faith. Your internal clock is so fried you've forgotten what real tired even feels like. But here's the thing. You're not suffering alone. Dozens of other sisters are just as sleep-deprived, just as disciplined, and just as annoyed when someone sneezes mid-psalm. But these early hours aren't a random form of punishment. They're sacred. They're part of the divine office, a carefully scheduled rhythm of prayer that divides your entire day. The logic is that if you sanctify every few hours with God's name, you won't have time to sin. Clever, right? Except time is slippery in the Middle Ages. It's not as if anyone has a digital display blinking on the wall. There are no pocket watches, no iPhones, no kitchen timers. You can't just say, "See you at 3 a.m." and expect anyone to show up on time. So how do you even know when it's the right time to pray? At first, you guess, you estimate. You assign one poor soul to stay up all night and monitor the stars. The moon becomes your supervisor, and eventually someone says, there has to be a better way. Now imagine you're that nun. Let's call you Sister Madeleine. You're smart, practical, and just a tiny bit rebellious. You've memorized the Psalms, mended thousands of robes, and churned more butter than you care to admit. But your mind? It doesn't shut off. Not even during Lauds. And it starts asking uncomfortable questions. Like, what if you didn't need Sister Beatrice stomping through the halls like a grumpy elephant to wake you? What if, stay with me here, you could wake up using a machine? Historians still argue whether the first alarm clock came from a nun's hands or a monk's, but many agree it began in religious communities desperate for more precise timekeeping. And who had more reason to care than cloistered nuns, for whom the entire day was scheduled down to the second syllable? Still, the idea of using technology to wake up for prayer is risky business. After all, the spiritual world is supposed to be above mechanical contraptions. You're supposed to hear God calling you. Not gears and bells and metal tongues clanging from a wooden box. But then again, God didn't invent insomnia. You suspect some nun did. One night, after yet another mistimed matins that starts too early and ends with Sister Genevieve snoring into her psalter, Sister Madeline finally snaps. She sneaks into the workshop after Compline, the final prayer of the night, and starts fiddling. With what? Oh, just a collection of pulleys, lead weights, and a half-wrecked wine press that never really worked. The room is chilly and smells like ink and candle soot. You watch her wrap a piece of gut string around a wooden wheel and tie it to a hammer. She places the hammer just above a bronze dinner bell, which she borrowed from the refectory, and hopes no one will miss. She nudges the weight, sets the wheel spinning slowly, and waits. 10 minutes pass. Nothing. Then, clang. Loud, awful, beautiful. She startles, smiles, and whispers, "Amen." Of course, this isn't exactly an alarm clock yet, not by today's standards. It doesn't have buttons, or snooze, or a way to avoid waking up everyone within a 500-foot radius. But it does ring when it's supposed to. Sort of. And that's enough to get the sisters buzzing, quietly, reverently, as always. Not everyone is thrilled. Sister Judith insists waking up by machine lacks humility. Sister Odile thinks it's witchcraft adjacent. And Mother Abbess? She raises one eyebrow and says if it means Beatrice stops waking us by shouting, I approve. You might wonder why these women didn't just sleep through the night and pray at dawn like normal people. The answer is theology. See, night is when the world is most silent, most still, closest to the divine. That's when the devil whispers, and that's when you're supposed to answer with sacred words. But answering takes timing. And timing, believe it or not, requires invention. Here's your first mainstream historical fact, the Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, mandated 8 daily prayers, called the canonical hours, and it didn't matter how tired you were, or whether the sun had the decency to rise. Here's your first quirky tidbit some convents used roosters as natural alarm clocks, literally trained birds rewarded with seeds, who would crow in exchange for treats. It worked, until they started crowing for attention at random hours like feathery drama queens. And here's our first scholarly debate. Some historians believe the earliest time-triggered alarm bells originated in Eastern Orthodox monasteries, not Western European convents. Others argue the true, first, alarm clock can't be traced to a single moment or place. It just ticked into being. But tonight, you're siding with Sister Madeline, because she's standing beside her prototype, hands slightly singed from candle wax, hair a frizzy halo around her face, watching her invention work with awe and exhaustion. One gear at a time, she's changing how the world wakes up. And you're beginning to suspect that medieval nuns weren't just praying for the future. They were building it. So, you're back on your feet, still cold, still sleepy, still thinking about how that ragtag collection of gears and bells somehow made matins a little less brutal last night. But as you shuffle through your day of chores, grinding herds, illuminating manuscripts, mentally calculating the next time you're allowed to nap, you realize something: that little invention might actually stick. But it's not just about comfort. Oh no, it goes deeper than that. It goes all the way back to the 6th century and a guy named Benedict. Saint Benedict of Nursia was, in modern terms, a bit of a control freak. Enthusiast. Picture a man so serious about discipline that he once had to rewrite his own rulebook because monks kept misbehaving. His rule, as it came to be known, wasn't just some light guide to spiritual living. It was the blueprint for monastic life, laying out everything from how many psalms to chant per day to how long you could speak during meals. Spoiler, not much. Now, imagine you're trying to live by this rule. There are no clocks on the walls, no wristwatches hidden in your robes, just bells, sunbeams, and internal dread. The rule says you must rise for prayer at the 8th hour of the night. But how do you even know what that means when midnight is more of a concept than a precise measurement? You, the humble nun, do what any overwhelmed employee does when the boss's demands get weirdly specific. You fudge it. You guess. You wake up whenever the sky looks about right and hope Sister Beatrice isn't already ringing the shame bell. But this flexibility comes with consequences. You might be early. You might be late. You might interrupt someone mid-prayer and receive a glare sharp enough to slice cheese. And that's where the rule of Saint Benedict starts to feel like an early version of Google Calendar, with no reminder notifications. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The rule of Saint Benedict divided each day into 8 canonical hours, including matins, midnightish, lauds, before dawn, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each of these had a fixed set of prayers and psalms, creating a relentless cycle of devotion. It was like being in an eternal spiritual boot camp, minus the protein shakes. But here's the twist. The rule didn't just control when you prayed. It structured your entire life. Everything had its time. Work had its time. Meals had their time. Even silence had a schedule. And woe unto the nun who dared to talk during the hour of silence. You haven't known passive aggression until you've experienced monastic side-eye. So how did you keep track of all these hours without clocks? You used people. Specifically, people with really unfortunate jobs. Enter the night watcher. This poor soul stayed up through the wee hours, monitoring stars or candle marks or just gut instinct, and then banged a bell to alert everyone it was time to shuffle into the chapel and pretend not to be furious. If the watcher overslept, the whole abbey did. If they rang too early, you got scowls. If they skipped a prayer entirely, you got the stare from the abbess that said, "You'll be cleaning chamber pots for a week." Which brings us to our quirky tidbit. Some monasteries used graduated candles to mark the passage of time. These candles were etched with lines that burned down hour by hour, sort of like the world's first wax-based countdown timer. Ingenious, right? Until it's windy, or someone sneezes too close, or the wax drips weirdly and suddenly it's terse and you've missed prime, and now you're spiritually out of sync with the entire universe. Still, nuns weren't pushovers. They adapted. Some learned to track the sun's arc through stained glass shadows. Others trained their bodies to wake up at regular intervals. A few just drank less wine before bed. But even with all these tricks, the system had its flaws. One of them being human bodies are not machines. You know this because you've fallen asleep standing up during Lauds more than once. You've also seen Sister Agatha doze off mid-Ave Maria and almost knock over a relic. The irony? All this effort to pray at the right time was starting to interfere with the actual praying part, which kind of defeated the purpose. Now, if you're thinking, why didn't they just agree on a time and use sundials or something? Great question. They did. Sort of. But sundials have one tiny flaw. They don't work at night. And guess when half the prayers were scheduled? That's right. Midnight. Pre-dawn. Twilight. Basically the exact hours when a sundial is just an expensive rock. So, Sister Madeleine's invention? It starts to look less like a quirky side project and more like a revolution. The idea that you could build something, a device that measured time reliably, even in darkness, even when the moon was being shy. It wasn't just clever, it was radical. Of course, word gets out. Other convents start whispering. Did you hear about the nuns at St. Lazare? They don't use a bell ringer anymore. They use a thing. Some are intrigued, others horrified, and some, predictably, just want to know if it makes enough noise to wake up Sister Claire, who's been known to sleep through thunderstorms. And now, here comes your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the earliest alarm bells were entirely mechanical, or if they were assisted by half-sleeping novices trained to pull ropes at suspiciously precise intervals. Some even claim that the first mechanical alarm was actually installed in a Benedictine monastery in England, not France. But as far as we're concerned tonight, the convent in our story was ahead of its time, literally. You walk into the chapel again the next morning, and something feels different. There's no grumbling, no late arrivals, no one frantically pulling on boots halfway through the antiphon. Everyone is on time, for the first time in memory. The prayers begin exactly when they're supposed to. It's eerie, it's wonderful, it's suspiciously mechanical. Sister Beatrice has retired her bell, and Sister Madeline, she's become a bit of a legend. Not that she wants fame. Fame is for secular sinners and dramatic poets. But she does take a certain quiet joy in seeing her invention work, in knowing that now, finally, the rule of Saint Benedict can be followed not just with faith, but with gears. You watch her at dinner, quietly carving new grooves into a candle, making notes on a scrap of parchment. She's not done, not even close. Because once you realize you can measure time, you start to wonder what else you can control. And that, dear night traveler, is how obsession with prayer schedules nudged the world toward invention. All because a group of exhausted nuns said, "There has got to be a better way." You sit cross-legged on the chapel floor, half listening to a psalm that repeats so many times, you start to wonder if the scribe was just stalling for ink. Your fingers absent-mindedly trace the edge of your robe. Around you, the sisters chant in rhythmic unison, calm, measured, eternal. It's hard not to be lulled into the belief that time is perfectly ordered here, divinely structured. But here's the secret, it's not. See, back before clocks started bossing everyone around, time was more of a social agreement than a scientific certainty. Especially in medieval Europe, the idea of an hour was loose, slippery, kind of like your grasp on Latin grammar after midnight. You might think an hour is an hour, right? 60 minutes, end of story. Except surprise, in medieval monastic life, that wasn't true. Time was seasonal. In summer, daylight hours were stretched, and nighttime hours were squished. In winter, the reverse. So a canonical hour wasn't a fixed length. It changed depending on the season. Imagine if your school day changed length just because it was snowing. Welcome to temporal chaos. So when the rule of Saint Benedict called for prayers at dawn, or at the third hour, the poor sister assigned to keep track basically had to guess. "Okay," she'd mutter, squinting out a narrowed stone window. "I think that shadow looks like third hour-ish." Which is why monastic timekeeping was part spiritual discipline, part meteorological gamble. Your mainstream historical fact here, medieval Europe ran mostly on temporal hours, 12 hours from sunrise to sunset, no matter how long that span actually was. So an hour in June might last 75 minutes, and the same hour in December could be as short as 45. And that meant a strict prayer schedule required either a miracle or some really creative accounting. Now, picture this, a winter morning, the kind that feels like it froze before it even started. It's dark. The candles are sputtering. And Sister Agatha, poor thing, swears it's time for prime. But Sister Madeline, our rogue innovator, holds up a piece of shadowed parchment and says, "Not yet. The tension is thick. One nun's sleep depends on another nun's shadow analysis." Enter the drama of canonical hours and the unspoken war of scheduling. Some abbeys tried to use sundials. Clever idea, until you remember sundials need sunlight, which, between overcast skies, thick cloister walls, and the general gloom of medieval winter, was often as absent as common sense during a relic auction. Others relied on those graduated candles we mentioned, but they too had their flaws. Wax burns faster in heat, slower in cold. Drafts make them flicker. And sometimes the cook borrows one for stew-related reasons. Don't ask. And so, as you watch Sister Madeline scribbled another adjustment into her timekeeping chart, you begin to see why precision wasn't just a luxury, it was survival. Without it, the entire rhythm of convent life could collapse like a badly needed loaf. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some abbeys trained young novices to become human timekeepers. These poor girls would be told to count heartbeats or breaths between prayers to keep the tempo going. Literally, someone's job was to stand there and think. 1, 2, 3. Psalm. Of course, that kind of stress can do things to a person. You don't just learn to track time, you feel it, like a second heartbeat. And sometimes it plays tricks on you. One sister swore she heard the bells before they rang. Another claimed she could smell prime coming. Neither was promoted. Essentially, though, Sister Madeline's experimental device begins to gain traction. It's not perfect. Sometimes it clanks early. Sometimes the string snaps and flings the hammer into the side wall. But the idea has planted itself deep in the abbey's bones. What if you didn't have to guess anymore? You start seeing adjustments, minor tweaks, innovations. One nun suggests adding a drip mechanism, like a water clock. Another mentions weights and counterweights. The smithy down the road hears about it and offers to cast a more precise gear system in exchange for 3 jars of Sister Marguerite's peach preserves. History pivots on stranger trades. Your open scholarly debate here, researchers still disagree on whether monastic communities were the first to conceptualize standardized hours, or whether they merely refined an earlier Roman system. Some argue that Islamic scholars had more advanced clocks centuries earlier, and Christian Europe simply caught up. Others claim the spiritual needs of monasteries forced Western innovation in ways that secular society wouldn't have dared. But none of that matters to you in this moment, in this abbey, when the bell chimes on time and no one's eyelids twitch with sleep-deprived panic. For once, the canonical hour arrives when it's supposed to, and everyone exhales. It's like the entire building has finally synchronized with itself. Of course, that creates a new problem. Now that the bell rings exactly when it should, you no longer have the excuse, "Oh, sorry, I thought it was still none." Accountability is coming. And it has gears. You lie in your straw mattress that night, listening to the faint metallic tick echoing through the corridor. The new prototype is still being tested. No one trusts it enough yet to replace all the traditional wake-up methods. But it's there, a tiny heartbeat in the wall, marking moments, demanding structure. You're both relieved and slightly terrified, because something strange is happening. Time is becoming external. It's no longer something you feel in your bones or guess by candlelight. It's becoming a thing, a presence, a discipline, something you can't ignore just because your feet are cold or your mood is sour. You begin to wonder, is this freedom or a new kind of prison? Because the moment a bell rings without human hands behind it, that's the moment control shifts. Not to God, not to the abbess, but to the machine. And Sister Madeline? She just smiles, gently tightening the mechanism. Not because she wants power, but because she's too tired to trust a rooster again. You wake not to a scowl or a stomp, not to Beatrice's booming voice or the squawk of a rooster with questionable timing, but to a clear, almost smug clang that echoes perfectly down the stone corridor. You blink, you wait, you realize, yes, that was real. The machine rang on time. Again. No one says it out loud, of course. Not yet. But as you join the silent line of sisters gliding into chapel like dark-winged birds, you all know what's changed. The machine works. And not just in theory. In practice. In darkness. In the groggy, soul-numb stretch of pre-dawn where nothing else seems to obey reason. It works. And that's exactly what makes it terrifying. You're not the only one watching it, either. The abbess has taken an interest. She walks by it after prayers, just a touch too slowly, pretending not to peer at the gears. A few younger novices hover nearby after chores, whispering about Sister Madeleine's ticking miracle, and Beatrice, deprived of her cherished role as bell summoner of matins, has started coughing a lot more during chapel. Coincidence? Doubtful. So, how does it work? Let's check. Step closer. But not too close. These early mechanisms are twitchy, temperamental, and only half understood, even by their creators. You watch as Sister Madeleine winds a cord around a wooden drum, threads it through a narrow pulley, and sets a weight, an old iron pot, repurposed, to slowly descend. As the weight drops, it turns a gear. The gear rotates a cam. The cam lifts a tiny metal lever. And when that lever slips free, clang. Just like that. Beautiful, brutal, reliable. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 13th century, some monastic communities were using striking clocks powered by falling weights and regulated by verge escapements, one of the earliest mechanisms to measure time in consistent, repeated intervals. They didn't tell time in the modern sense, but they could signal time, and that was enough to change everything. But before those larger tower clocks, before city bells began ruling over public life, it was communities like yours, nuns, monks, hermits in drafty robes, who nurtured the earliest forms of mechanical timekeeping. Not because it was fashionable, but because it was necessary. You had to know when to pray, not around dawn, not whenever someone feels like it. You needed precision, divine precision, and maybe just a little bit of revenge on the rooster. But let's not pretend this early clock is sleek or efficient. No, it groans, it wheezes, the gears sometimes slip, the string frays, the weight occasionally crashes to the floor with enough noise to wake the entire village. And once, memorably, it rang during Compline instead of matins, resulting in a moment of such theological panic that Sister Agatha dropped her psalter into the holy water font. Still, each misfire teaches something. The sisters adapt. They learn to calculate how fast the weight descends. They test new materials for better pulleys. One even suggests adding an adjustable peg to control when the bell rings, a primitive form of scheduling. She calls it the matin stopper. You call it genius. Now comes your quirky tidbit. Some early alarm clocks weren't just mechanical, they involved scent. Yes, you heard that right. A few inventive minds experimented with aromatic alarms, candle-triggered incense pots that would fill a chamber with pungent odors at a set time. Practical? Dubious. But if nothing else, it explains why Sister Marguerite kept waking up, smelling like burning rosemary. Of course. Not everyone loves this march toward mechanized holiness. One sister mutters that machines are for workshops, not worship. Another insists that true devotion means waking without aid. She conveniently forgets the time she slept through terse and had to recite 3 Hail Marys and clean the privy as penance. The abbess? She remains strategically silent. She neither praises nor punishes, but her visits to the mechanism grow more frequent. And when the chapel bell rings exactly as the sun begins to rise, before even the birds dare, she smiles, just a little. Which brings us to your open scholarly debate. Some historians claim the earliest working mechanical alarm bell was designed in a 12th century monastery in York, England. Others argue for a Spanish convent, or even a now lost Orthodox monastery deep in the Balkans. No one agrees, but many now believe that women in cloistered life may have been among the first engineers of functional time-triggered devices, just without ever being formally credited. You don't need the credit, though. You need order. You need a life that flows like a chant, each note in place, each step on beat. And this device, clunky, imperfect, miraculous, offers that. For the first time, you feel the day itself aligning. Meals start promptly. Chores shift smoothly. Even the chickens seem less chaotic. But you also notice something else. Now that the bell is no longer dependent on human memory or guesswork, you begin to trust it more than your own senses. One morning, you're sure it's still the middle of the night. Your bones say sleep. But the bell clangs, and so you rise. Not because you want to, because the machine said so. And that, quietly, terrifies you. You're starting to live by the tick. Not by the sun, not by the soul, by the tick. Still, you can't help but marvel. You run your fingers over the wood, the brass fittings, the smoothed grooves where countless adjustments have been made. You trace its logic, feel its heartbeat. It is alive in a strange, silent way. Not with blood, with intention. Because this wasn't made to control you. It was made to free you. From the weight of responsibility, the stress of guessing, the shame of lateness. It was made so you could focus on prayer, not panic. But even freedom has a price, and that price is surrender. You go to bed that night, listening to it again. That faint click, that slow wind. And somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming, you think, what happens when this clock decides to ring early, or not at all? Who wakes the wakeful? And who keeps it honest? It starts with a whisper. Not a scandalous whisper, mind you. There are no love affairs behind tapestries in this place. No hidden letters or poisoned goblets. Just the hushed ripple of intrigue among women who've taken vows of silence more seriously than they take their soup temperature. The clock is whispering, not literally, of course. That would be both terrifying and miraculous. And you're not entirely sure which one the abbess would prefer, but its presence has grown louder in the minds of the sisters. The clang that once startled everyone into wakefulness now arrives like prophecy. It predicts time, commands it. And for some of you, it's starting to feel unsettling, because it's not just about waking up anymore. The bell rings, and now the cook begins preparing the day's gruel, exactly on cue. The scriptorium nuns change shifts with eerie precision. You've even heard murmurs about timing prayers to the bell's pattern, speeding up if you're lagging, behind the second clang, slowing down if you're too far ahead. It's like time has grown hands and begun conducting you all in some cosmic performance. That's when Sister Madeline's next thought arrives. What if this machine, this beautiful, clunky, gear-munching creature, could do more than just wake people? What if it could orchestrate the entire day? She doesn't say it out loud, not yet, but you see it in the way she studies her sketches longer, how she mutters about split strike options and bell interval automation over her bowl of lentils. Her workshop smells like wax, steel, and quiet ambition. Your mainstream historical fact here: by the mid-13th century, early mechanical clocks in monastic settings began to strike bells at multiple fixed times throughout the day, not just for matins, but for other canonical hours as well. These weren't clocks in the modern sense with faces and hands. They were more like automated assistants. Primitive, yes, but groundbreaking. Now let's zoom in on the workshop. You stand next to Sister Madeline as she threads yet another cord through her new addition, a gear with 8 notches. Each notch represents one of the canonical hours. Each notch, when aligned, triggers a different hammer to strike the bell. And yes, 8 times a day it will now ring. Not just once, not just when it's dark, but at every sacred checkpoint. Vespers, Lauds, Terce, Sext, all of them. You, understandably, are torn between admiration and dread. It's a little like watching the Abbey become a music box. And not the sweet kind with dancing ballerinas. More like the kind that plays a hymn sewed precisely, so inescapably, that you stop hearing music and start hearing command. That's your quirky tidbit. Some early mechanical clocks had multiple bells tuned to different pitches, so each hour had a distinct sound. Legend says one convent had a chime for each of the 7 sorrows of Mary, each increasingly mournful, like a spiritual xylophone designed to guilt you into piety. Naturally, not all the sisters are thrilled. Sister Odile grumbles that the bells are louder than ever. Like the voice of an impatient angel, she says, before accidentally burning the bread. Sister Claudine insists she's developed a bell migraine. And Beatrice, demoted from bell ringer to general-purpose scowler, is now writing poetry about the tyranny of tick. But others are mesmerized. There's a kind of security in knowing what's coming, in not having to worry. You can focus on prayer, on copying scripture, on not falling asleep in your soup. The rhythm carries you, until of course it doesn't. It happens on a Wednesday. A normal day is anything in a convent can be called normal. The bells ring for sext, but something's off. It's early, not by much, just a minute or 2, but enough that your stomach, trained now by routine, protests. Enough that Sister Genevieve spills ink on her psalter. Enough that the abbess lifts one eyebrow in a way that could flatten a heretic. The room stiffens, and the whispers return, because if the clock can ring early, it can ring late. And if it rings late, who's really in control? Now your open scholarly debate. Some argue that these early clocks never achieved true accuracy, that without a reliable escapement mechanism, they drifted constantly. Others believe the monastic versions were accurate enough for their purpose, with regular human intervention keeping them on track. But the heart of the debate is this: did these machines replace human judgment, or merely augment it? Back in the workshop, Sister Madeline is mortified. She recalibrates everything, adjusts the counterweight, remeasures the pulley tension. She mutters that the damp must have warped the axle. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. No one knows. But the illusion is broken. The machine, her machine, isn't divine. It's not perfect. It's just wood and metal and stubborn will. And that makes it a little too human for comfort. That night, as you lie awake listening for the familiar tick, you realize you're no longer comforted by it. You're waiting, watching, doubting. The silence between ticks feels longer. The weight of the bell hangs in your thoughts like thunder that hasn't landed yet. And somewhere deep inside the gears, Sister Madeline makes a decision. She's going to make it better, faster, more precise. She draws a new design. It has more teeth, more control. A locking mechanism she calls a ratchet. a virtue. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds both holy and slightly dangerous. Because once the machine becomes trustworthy again, it becomes law. And law, as you've learned in this abbey, is not to be questioned. The machine moans. It's not a metaphor this time. It actually groans. A deep, wooden sigh that leaks out of the corridor in the dead of night, like a ghost with indigestion. You're not the only one who hears it. Sister Agatha sits bolt upright, clutching her crucifix like she's expecting the final trumpet. Outside, in the chapel hall, the mechanical alarm, the pride of the abbey, the herald of prayer, the clunky heartbeat of your days, is misbehaving. Again, you throw on your robe and follow the flickering light of Sister Madeleine's lantern as she hurries past the novices' cells with a whisper of wool and resolve. When you reach the device, it's dripping. Literally, a slow, rhythmic plink of water lands in the pan below its belly. The wood has swelled from the night damp, and the entire mechanism now leans ever so slightly to the left, like a tired monk after too much communion wine. Madeleine grimaces. It's the water regulator again. Because yes, there's water involved now. Welcome to the hydromechanical phase of nun-based clock engineering. Your mainstream historical fact before escapement-regulated clocks took over in Europe. Water clocks, also called clepsydras, were among the most advanced timekeeping devices. Civilizations from Babylon to China used dripping water to mark the passage of time. Some European monastic communities tried to adapt these designs to call monks and nuns to prayer, with mixed and often hilarious results. Sister Madeleine had read about them, or at least heard whispers from a merchant who'd passed through with a satchel full of Byzantine curiosities. Inspired or possibly sleep-deprived beyond reason, she decided to merge her bell mechanism with a gravity-fed water flow. The idea? As the water filled a bowl, the rising weight would pull a rope, which would turn the gear, which would trip the hammer, which would ring the bell. What could possibly go wrong? You, for one, remember the first test. The water flowed too fast, and the bell rang every 15 minutes. At Matins alone, it rang 4 times before the second psalm. You've never seen a group of holy women so close to spiritual mutiny. Sister Claudine actually hissed, but Madeleine doesn't give up. She tweaks the inlet. She replaces the bowl with a narrower jar. She slices a hole into a goat bladder to act as a flexible funnel. Don't ask where she got it. Eventually, the system holds, at least long enough for her to announce, with barely disguised pride, that the abbey is now using a regulated aquatic chime. You try to be impressed, but the thing sounds haunted. Each drip echoes through the night like a leaky curse. The whole building now smells faintly of wet stone and vinegar. And when the wind shifts just right, you swear, pourvoir. You hear the bell groaning before it even strikes. It's like the machine is waking itself up, resentfully. Your quirky tidbit in at least one documented 13th century monastery, a malfunctioning water clock rang so incessantly during Lauds that the abbot declared it possessed. They performed a minor exorcism on the contraption and buried it in the garden under a statue of Saint Jerome. The garden bloomed violently the following spring. Coincidence? Probably, but no one used water clocks there again. Meanwhile, back at your convent, the moaning device is starting to become a character in itself. You hear sisters referring to it in hushed tones. Did she check him today? I think he rang early again. The clock has a gender now, apparently, and a personality. Sister Agatha insists it's sulking. Sister Odile swears it behaves better when she prays beside it. Beatrice, ever salty, says it's just Madeleine's pet, always dripping. Never useful. But even critics have to admit when it works, it's glorious. One morning the bell strikes with such perfect clarity. Soft, insistent, inevitable. You feel the prayer begin before you even reach the chapel. The rhythm carries you like a current. Time, once a foggy suggestion, is now sculpted into something solid, dependable. And for a moment, just a moment, the whole abbey breathes in sync. And then, the drape stops. Completely. You're sweeping the cloister floor when it happens. The silence is so unnatural, it takes you a full 10 seconds to realize what's missing. No plink, no drip, no moan. You run. By the time you reach the device, Sister Madeline is already there, staring down at a soggy mess of collapsed tubing and a bowl full of sediment. The filter has clogged. The water has stagnated. A layer of green scum creeps along the surface like guilt at a wine festival. She doesn't cry. She just exhales, straightens, and says, "We need metal." And just like that, the age of leaky wooden pots ends. Your open scholarly debate. Some historians argue that water clocks persisted in Europe well into the 14th century in smaller communities and religious enclaves, while others claim they were quickly abandoned in favor of weight-driven mechanical clocks after the introduction of the Verge escapement. The truth may be that both systems coexisted longer than we think, especially in places like nunneries, where resources were limited and innovation often took the form of improvisation. So the abbey blacksmith, who had previously considered the nuns a quiet mystery wrapped in cloth and curfews, is now summoned into the inner sanctum. He surveys the soggy mess, scratches his beard, and says, "I can make something better." The next few weeks are a blur of hammering, measuring, and some highly suspicious smuggling of copper tubing. The new design? A hybrid. Still gravity-powered, but with metal components now. Stronger, smoother, more precise. The weight system is improved. The pulley assembly reinforced. The water basin is replaced with a sealed tank. It no longer drips, it flows. Quietly. Like confidence. The bell? Sharper, brighter, proud. You don't name it, that would be silly. But some of the sisters start genuflecting a little closer when they pass it, just in case. Because now, the bell doesn't just tell time, it commands it. You lie awake that night and wait for the sound. Not with fear, not with annoyance, with anticipation. You count 1, 2, 3, and then it comes. Clang! Right on time. For now. The bell rings again. Not loud, not rushed, just on time. You stir in bed and almost smile. Almost, because you know what this means. After countless misfires, repairs, prayers, and one unfortunate goat bladder incident, Sister Madeline's hybrid clock has finally reached what everyone is calling the stable phase. The sisters have stopped holding their breath before each chime. Even Beatrice has toned down her glare-to-ward ratio. And you start to notice something odd happening. You trust it. You trust the bell. And that, oddly enough, changes everything. Where once the abbey moved through the day like a reluctant herd of damp sheep, now you glide from prayer to work to meal like gears in a much larger machine. The harmony is eerie, efficient. It's also unnerving, because you find yourself thinking, if we can schedule time so precisely here, what else could be measured? What else could be improved? And Sister Madeline? She's thinking it too. She's begun charting, not just the canonical hours, but the duration of daily tasks. She wants to know how long it takes to grind flour, clean the cloister, copy a psalm. At first you think she's just bored, but then she starts adjusting the schedule, subtly. At first, it's harmless. Meals are moved slightly closer to work shifts, minimizing downtime. Scriptorium hours are shifted to take advantage of better sunlight. Laundry is now done precisely after none. Not whenever we remember Sister Odile is buried in bedsheets again. You gain minutes, maybe hours. The Abbey becomes optimized. Your mainstream historical fact, by the late 13th century, the mechanical clock began to emerge not just as a spiritual tool, but as a manager of time. Monasteries started adapting schedules based on clock-regulated intervals, gradually introducing the idea of time as something that could be subdivided, tracked, and improved. This shift was a precursor to the broader societal change that eventually gave us the hour, the minute, the workday. Of course, this isn't without pushback. Sister Claudine begins timing her own prayers, then insists she's being rushed. The psalms need to breathe, she argues, not clip-clop like a mule cart on cobblestone. Beatrice has taken to sitting directly across from the clock mechanism during meals. She doesn't eat, she watches. You suspect she's waiting for it to fail. Or to blink. And the abbess? Still silent. But she's begun joining Sister Madeleine in the workshop. That's new. You happen to pass by one day and hear the abbess say, "Can it track moon phases?" And Madeleine replies, "It could." That's when it clicks. This isn't just about waking people up anymore, or marking prayers, or even managing chores. This is about knowledge, about control, about power. And in a strange, holy, candlelit way, you're witnessing the birth of a data-driven monastery. Your quirky tidbit in one surviving 14th century monastic manual. A nun recorded how long each sister took to eat a bowl of porridge over a 6-month period. It was meant to determine whether talking during meals delayed digestion. The results? Sister Agatha was the fastest. Sister Odile took twice as long. And the author concluded, some mouths are holier when closed. You begin to notice the language changing too. Sisters say half past terce. They say quarter bell to vespers. No one used to speak like this. The hours used to feel like floating ideas, shapes in the day's fog. Now they've got edges, definitions, expectations. You're no longer feeling time. You're measuring it. And that brings us to your open scholarly debate. Some historians argue that monastic timekeeping created the psychological foundation for industrialization. That before factories, before train schedules, before productivity charts, there were abbeys like yours, using bells not just to pray, but to track and control the day. Others insist the monastic model was still rooted in spiritual rhythm, not economic utility. But most agree the mechanical clock began its reign behind cloistered walls. And you're caught in the middle. Because the more the system improves, the more productive you all become, but the more strange it feels. You stop losing hours, but you also stop wandering. You don't drift anymore. You don't daydream in chapel or accidentally fall asleep beside the garden wall. You are on time, all the time. Even dreams feel shorter. And one night, that fact wakes you. You sit up and realize you haven't heard the ticking. The clock is silent. You rush down the corridor, expecting disaster. Gears on the floor, a cracked bell, a novice crying in the corner. But instead, you find the mechanism whole, perfect, still. It hasn't broken. It's just been paused. Sister Madeleine is sitting beside it, in the dark, hands folded. She looks up and says, "I wanted to see if we'd notice." And you did. You all did. Because when the bell doesn't ring, it's not just a silence, it's a hole. You sit with her a while. You don't speak. There's something solemn about this pause, as if you're visiting a graveyard for seconds that never ticked. And for a moment, just a sliver of breath, you feel what it was like before the machine, before time became a cage with golden bars. And then, just before dawn, Sister Madeline leans forward and restarts it. Clink, tick, tick. The spell breaks. You stand and follow the rhythm back to prayer. The bell rings, but now you're listening differently. Not for the sound, because the tone is always the same. Not for the timing, because it's always precise. You're listening for the weight beneath it, the intention. It's a strange sensation, hearing a bell and feeling like it's staring back at you. Like it's keeping tabs, not just on the time, but on you. And you aren't alone. The Abbey has changed. Slowly, quietly, like snow melting into stone, the sisters have adapted to the clock's rhythm. But it's more than adaptation. It's dependence. Tasks start and stop at its command. Prayers rise and fall with its chime. You've stopped asking when and started waiting to be told. Even the weather defers to it. A storm rages outside, and yet the bell sounds as if it rings from somewhere above the clouds. Unbothered, eternal. Sister Madeline has started refining the device again. Not because it's failing, but because she can. She's added a backup weight, just in case the primary ever slips. The bell now has a damper that makes it sound richer, deeper, like a voice that's seen things. One of the novices swears she felt her bones vibrate during Vespers. But that's not the real news. The real news is what the abbess unveils during the evening meal. She stands up. Rare. She clears her throat. Rarer. And she says, "We've had a request from the brothers at Saint Antoine." The refectory goes still. They want to send an apprentice to study the device. You feel it in your stomach, that flutter, that spark. The idea that someone else, outside, has heard of your ticking marvel. The idea that the machine might travel, that it might leave, or worse, that others might copy it. Your mainstream historical fact by the early 14th century, monastic timekeeping technology began to spread between communities. Records show monks and nuns traveling across regions to share mechanical designs, tools, and even bell calibration techniques. These exchanges helped disseminate the concept of mechanical time throughout Europe, years before town clocks became common. The reaction is mixed. Some sisters are proud, others anxious. Sister Claudine mutters something about tempting Babel. Beatrice makes a snorting sound that sounds like skepticism dipped in judgment. You're caught between awe and jealousy. You helped birth this thing. You cleaned it, listened to it, dreamed beside it. And now some beardless monk from Saint Antoine is going to tinker with it like it's his turn with a toy. You want to be generous. Really, you do. But a little part of you wonders if Sister Madeline regrets sharing her secret at all. And then you meet him. Brother Simon arrives with a walking stick he clearly doesn't need, and a satchel full of small tools, mostly useless. He's young, earnest, asks a lot of questions. Some smart, some just adorable. He calls the machine a wonder. He calls Sister Madeline a genius. You try not to roll your eyes, but it slips out. To his credit, he notices, and he doesn't take offense. Instead, he offers you a square of cheese from his pack. Real cheese, not the Abbey's usual crumbly goat impersonation, and says, "You probably know more about this than I ever will." It's a smart move. So, grudgingly, you show him around. You point out the counterweights, the tension pulley, the double chime lever. You even admit you helped design the small waxed sleeve that prevents the rope from fraying near the crank. He's genuinely impressed. And maybe that's what softens you, because in spite of your suspicion, Brother Simon asks the right kind of questions. He doesn't want to steal it, he wants to understand it. He wants to bring the idea back so that his community can also rise together, pray together, live together by something better than guesswork and candles. Here's your quirky tidbit. One traveling monk reportedly returned to his monastery with hand-drawn diagrams of a nun's invention so complex. The brothers thought it was encoded scripture. It took them 3 months to realize it was a bell-triggering schematic. Once deciphered, it worked for 12 years without failure, until a goat chewed through the suspension cord. Back in the workshop, Sister Madeline and Brother Simon spend long hours debating materials, discussing refinements, even arguing gently over bell acoustics. You watch them work like clockmakers in miniature, spiritual blacksmiths forging time itself from brass and string. And slowly, your anxiety changes. You start to see the gift for what it is, not the machine, the idea. The idea that time can be tamed, shared, improved. Your open scholarly debate scholars continue to wrestle with how many of these early monastic inventions were original, and how many were adaptations of older, forgotten technologies, possibly Roman, possibly Eastern, possibly both. Some argue that the mechanical bell trigger was invented several times over by different communities, each unaware of the others. Others insist the idea spread like ink across parchment, slow, inevitable, and transformative. You don't need the debate settled. You can feel the spread already, because when Brother Simon leaves, gently wrapping his copy of the schematic in linen, you see the look in his eye, the way he walks straighter, lighter, like he's carrying fire in a jar, and you realize the abbey has become a spark, not a loud one, not the kind that makes kings take notice, but the quiet kind, the kind that slips between pages of history, nudges ideas forward, makes things possible. The bell rings again, but this time it echoes farther than the walls can hold. The abbey is quiet again, not silent, never truly silent, not with the whisper of robes, the low murmur of prayers, the faint tick of gears echoing through stone, but quiet in the way a place gets after something important has happened, after a guest leaves and the air hasn't quite settled back into its old shape. Brother Simon is gone. He left before Lord's, before most of the sisters were even awake. No fanfare, just the soft clink of his walking stick, still mostly decorative, down the gravel path. His linen-wrapped schematic tucked beneath his arm like sacred scripture. You watched him go from the cloister window, half resentful, half proud. And yet, something's off. The bell still rings, still tracks the day, still calls the community like a shepherd's crook, made of iron and discipline. But the moment he left, you realized it no longer feels like yours, because the idea has left. And now, for the first time, it occurs to you what happens when people you don't know, in places you've never seen, start living by your time. It's a heady, disorienting thought. So you do what you've always done when your thoughts start swirling too loud. You go to the scriptorium. You sit with ink, with parchment, with words older than you, older than the abbey, older than even Sister Agatha's eyebrows. You write, not scripture, not notes. You write a journal, because someone has to remember how this all began. Your mainstream historical fact, many early monastic communities maintained detailed annals, not just about kings or famines, but about mechanical inventions, changes in daily life, and even how the liturgy felt when timekeeping changed. Some of these time diaries survive today, offering rare insight into how spiritual life and machinery first entwined. You start with the simplest sentence you can manage. Before the bell, there was guessing. And you continue. You describe the water clocks, the gears, the long nights spent winding ropes, the first chime that rang on its own. The feeling of being both in control and controlled by something you made. You write about fear too, the fear that maybe it's not just time you're measuring. Maybe it's yourself, because now that every hour is exact, every mistake stands out. Every moment of idleness is visible. Every pause in prayer, every daydream, every moment you used to forgive as wandering thought, now it feels like deviation. The bell does not tolerate deviation, and that realization lands heavy. Here's your quirky tidbit in one 13th century nunnery. A sister wrote a letter to a neighboring abbess, confessing that she deliberately slowed the clock mechanism to preserve the mystery of dusk. She was later reassigned to garden duty, where, ironically, she developed a highly efficient irrigation system based on drip intervals. Some women just need to tinker. You consider doing the same, not sabotaging the clock, never, but adjusting it, just a little, not for mischief, for grace, for silence, for humanity. But Sister Madeleine beats you to it. She calls it the contemplative delay. One evening, she gathers the sisters and explains, "From now on, one bell a day will ring without cause." You all stare. It will not signal a task, or a prayer, or a mealtime. When it rings, you will do nothing. You wait for clarification. There is none, and so the next evening it happens. A single, clear chime. Not matins, not vespers. Just a bell. You're in the garden pruning lavender when you hear it. The sound reaches across the sky like a question mark. You freeze. You inhale, you exhale, and you don't move. No one does. For a full minute, the abbey is completely still. Not with confusion, with intention. That's your open scholarly debate. Was the introduction of non-functional bells in monastic life an intentional theological act designed to create space for unstructured contemplation? Or were they the result of error, later sanctified through habit? Some historians argue that these moments were spiritual accidents turned into doctrine. Others believe they were engineered pauses, early attempts to keep the soul from becoming just another gear. Whatever the truth, the impact is real. The contemplative bell becomes a thing. It moves times. It changes forms. Some weeks it rings at dawn, others at dusk, sometimes twice a day, sometimes not at all. It reminds you the machine may shape the day, but the spirit must shape the machine. And with this shift comes something unexpected. Joy. Not the loud kind, not festival joy. Quiet joy. Joy in knowing that not every moment must be efficient, that even in a place ruled by gears and prayer schedules, there is room for stillness, for birdsong, for breath. Soon the sisters begin to anticipate the contemplative bell, not like a task, like a gift, a permission slip, a sigh turned into sound. You start writing about those moments in your journal. You call them the ghost hours, because they don't belong to the schedule. They're stolen, and they're sacred. One evening, you walk past the mechanism and pause. You run your fingers along its polished wood. You trace the groove where the rope pulls tight before the chime, and you say out loud, "Thank you." You're not sure who you're talking to. The clock, the nun who made it, the God who allowed it. Maybe all of them. maybe none. But the feeling lingers. Not control, not obedience. Connection. The seasons change. You notice it in the light first. That lazy angle of sun that now stretches longer across the chapel floor. Dust motes float like faded prayers, dancing in golden silence. Even the bell sounds different somehow. Slower in the summer air, fuller in the winter gloom. Still exact, still unflinching, but with a kind of weathered authority. Like a grandfather who never raises his voice because he never has to. The clock's still going, unfazed by weather, sickness, birthdays no one celebrates, and Sister Odil's ever-worsening habit of falling asleep in odd corners of the garden. You wonder if it will outlive all of you. And for the first time, you think, what happens then? The younger novices have never known a life without it. They don't remember the days when Beatrice yelled the hours like a human rooster, or when you woke by instinct and guesswork. To them, the machine is the abbey. Its ticking is as natural as the creak of the wood, the rustle of habits, the flicker of candlelight. It is rhythm. It is order. It is home. And yet, you feel a shift coming. Not because the bell fails. Quite the opposite. It's more precise than ever. Sister Madeleine, now aging but still sharper than any chisel in the workshop, has added new features. The mechanism can now self-correct minor misalignments. There's a weighted flywheel to regulate the fall of the primary weight. She even experimented with a primitive bell dampener so the Compline chime doesn't jolt light sleepers like a war horn. It's perfect. Too perfect. Your mainstream historical fact by the 14th century, innovations like the verge escapement began appearing in European clock design, dramatically improving timekeeping precision. While the exact origin is debated, these mechanisms allowed for near-continuous movement control, ushering in a new age of accurate, mechanical clocks, especially in monasteries and cathedrals. So naturally, Sister Madeleine builds one, or something like it. She doesn't call it an escapement. She just calls it the whisper wheel. It reduces the margin of error to almost nothing. The bell doesn't just ring on time now. It rings exactly on time, to the second. And that's when you start having trouble sleeping. Because now you're hearing it in your dreams. Not the clang, just the tick. The tiny, steady tick of the flywheel, spinning, locking, spinning, over and over. You begin to expect it. Your breath starts to mirror it. You time your morning prayers to it, without thinking. You even catch yourself blinking in rhythm once, and that's when you know it's inside you now. It's not a clock anymore. It's your heartbeat. Your quirky tidbit in a now lost Cistercian convent near the French Pyrenees. Records suggest that one sister had to be excused from communal duties after claiming she could no longer separate the voice of the bell from the voice of God. Her fellow nuns responded by building a smaller, muffled version of the bell for her private use. It rang only once a day, softly, like a sigh. You envy her, because no matter how much you love the machine, part of you misses the messiness, the unpredictability, the surprise of waking early and finding the world still dark and unscheduled. You try to express this to Sister Madeleine one evening, during one of her rare outdoor walks. The two of you are sitting by the herb garden, listening to the distant tick through the window. You say, "Do you ever wonder if we made it too good?" She thinks for a while, then replies, "We were never trying to make it perfect, just obedient." You ask, "And now that it is?" She shrugs, "Now we serve it better." The words echo in your head for days. Now we serve it better. Your open scholarly debate. Some historians argue that medieval clocks weren't intended to dominate life, but to reflect it. to assist human rhythm, not override it. Others argue that once clocks became more accurate than nature, they redefined time itself, shifting the authority from the organic, sunrise, birdsong, hunger, to the mechanical. The debate isn't about gears, it's about who gets to define reality. And in your abbey, the answer is becoming increasingly clear. The bell doesn't just announce prayer now, it defines it. The time before it rings doesn't feel real. You don't exist until the clang tells you what you're doing. And then something happens. The mechanism jams. Just once. But it's enough. It's Lord's. The sun is already painting the chapel walls with early pink, and still, no bell. The silence stretches. You wait. The sisters wait. Even Beatrice, now too old to scowl with full force, stands frozen, half knelt, staring at the place where the sound should be. Nothing. For the first time in years, the day doesn't start. Eventually, someone coughs. Someone else whispers. Then, like a flock unsure where to fly, the sisters begin moving toward the chapel anyway. No one leads. You just go. And something strange happens. You pray. You sing. You finish the psalms. You do everything right, without the bell. It's not perfect, not synchronized, but it's real. And afterward, as you sit in the pew, still breathing hard from whatever that was, you realize something. The machine may define time, but it doesn't define you. You defined it once. And maybe, if needed, you could again. That night, Sister Madeline quietly disassembles the whisper wheel. No one complains. The bell is still precise, but now it's just a little off. On purpose. You wake up before the bell. Not by much, just a breath, just a heartbeat. But it's enough to feel odd. Like arriving at a sentence before the speaker gets to say it. The air is still, the sky just starting to lift its curtain of navy. A convent is holding its breath, and so are you. Then, finally, clang a little later than usual. You smile. Sister Madeline's slight misalignment from yesterday, an intentional, tiny shift in the gear timing, holds. She's offset the bell by mere seconds, maybe half a minute, but now everyone notices, and they have thoughts. Sister Claudine insists the delay makes prayer feel more sacredly suspenseful. Sister Odile thinks it's a punishment. Beatrice, ever the lighthouse of joy, mutters, "We had precision, and now we have mood swings." But you feel freedom. It's like the machine blinked, and in that blink, a little bit of humanity returned. Still, there's something else brewing under the surface now. Something bigger than delayed bells or contemplative pauses. You begin to hear rumors. Not rumors of scandal, rumors of interest. Apparently, the bishop has heard about your abbey's invention. Or rather, about the idea that time can be commanded, divided, controlled with such effortless consistency. And he's curious. Curiosity, you've learned, is rarely harmless. Your mainstream historical fact by the early 1300s. Word of monastic timekeeping devices had reached secular rulers, merchants, and city councils. Mechanical clocks soon began appearing. In civic towers, especially in cities like Milan, Paris, and London. These clocks weren't just tools. They were statements of power, modernity, and control. And now your abbey has drawn attention. A letter arrives. It's sealed with a red wax crest, delivered by a courier who clearly doesn't understand that shouting for the abbess in a cloister is frowned upon. The letter is addressed not to the abbess, nor Sister Madeline, nor even the convent at large. It is addressed to the Keeper of Time, a title no one has used, but everyone knows who it means. You gather in the refectory after Vespers. The letter is read aloud. The bishop writes in florid language, but the meaning is plain. He wishes to commission a duplicate of your timekeeping device, not for a cathedral, not for prayer, but for the market square in a nearby city. He wants bells to ring on the hour, so shops can open and close together, so workers can be dismissed at dusk, so lice can be ordered as cleanly as your abbey's days. The room goes still. This isn't about waking for prayer anymore. This is about commerce, about profit, about control. The abbess says nothing at first, just folds the letter. Her face is unreadable, but her silence says plenty. Sister Madeleine's jaw tightens. It's not meant for that. The bishop has even offered silver, more than enough to repair the entire south wing, replace the convent's crumbling well, and buy actual real parchment instead of the thin sheepskin variant you've been scraping through for years. But still, no answer. Not yet. Your quirky tidbit, one early mechanical clock, was funded by a city council who used it to fine bakers whose ovens didn't open at the legal time. The device was so successful in regulating daily trade that local guilds complained it gave unfair advantage to those who could hear the bell more clearly. Eventually, a second clock was commissioned just for the marketplace, and disputes decreased by 41%. Back in the abbey, debate brews. One group argues that sharing the invention fulfills your mission, bringing order, charity, and clarity to the world beyond your walls. Another insists it will corrupt what the bell stands for, that once it chimes for money, for trade, for taxes, it's no longer sacred, it's no longer yours. You find yourself torn. You remember the early days, the clumsy gears, the cold floors, the wild joy of the first successful strike. You remember being proud, afraid, awed. You remember feeling like you'd helped create something that mattered. So doesn't it deserve to be shared? But the bell was never just a machine. It became your rhythm, your faith, your open scholarly debate. Did the move from monastic to public clocks represent the secularization of time? Some historians argue that the bells merely took on new roles, still communal, still sacred in their own way. Others believe this marked the moment when time ceased being divine and became economic, when the clock shifted allegiance from heaven to earth. In the end, the abbess does something no one expects. She sends a reply. She says yes, but only under one condition, that the new clock includes a contemplative bell, a daily chime that serves no purpose, that rings without explanation, that reminds everyone that not all time is measurable, that some time, just a sliver each day, belongs to silence, to nothing, to everything. The bishop agrees. You don't know if he understands, but you hope someday someone will. And so preparations begin. Sister Madeleine, her hands more gnarled now than you remember, begins drafting new schematics. You help her this time. You sharpen the charcoal. You hold the waxed string steady. You file the teeth of a new gear while she murmurs to herself in Latin. There's joy in it. There's sorrow too, because you know this is goodbye, not to the machine, but to your secret. Soon, the world will wake to its own bell, and time will never be private again. The crate creaks. It's heavy, solid oak bound in iron, packed with straw and reverence. Inside the new mechanism, the second of its kind. Not a copy, but a sibling. Different materials, slightly adjusted dimensions, but the same bones, the same soul. Sister Madeleine's seal, pressed into red wax, shimmers faintly in the candlelight. You stand with the others in the courtyard, watching the cart wobble down the old dirt path toward the city. The wheels catch every root, every stone, but still it moves. Forward, away. Sister Odile. Sniffles. Not from sentimentality. She's got hay fever again. You? You're still deciding how you feel. Because now it's real. The machine has left. Time has left. You return to your duties, but everything feels subtly off. Like you're acting in a play, where the lines are the same, but the tone has changed. The bell still rings. The meals are still bland. But the silence between each chime feels expectant, like the abbey itself is waiting to hear what the world will do with your creation. Your mainstream historical fact, the earliest town clocks, usually installed in civic towers, were not just about function. They were civic symbols, instruments of pride, proof of progress. Bells regulated trade, curfews, even public punishments. Time became not just sacred, it became governmental, and you've helped start that. A few weeks later, word arrives. The bell in the city square is ringing. On time, consistently, strangely beautifully. The market now opens and closes with a new kind of rhythm. Bakers shout in unison. Merchants time sales to the chime. But what surprises everyone? The contemplative bell has become a local event. People stop. Some bow their heads, others laugh, a few kiss. One report says a group of children have turned the mystery bell into a game. If it rings while they're on one foot, it's good luck. It's spreading. Your bell is spreading. And back at the Abbey, things are both exactly the same and completely different. Sister Madeleine has stepped down from her role as keeper. She's chosen to mentor two novices, clever, stubborn girls who know more about ratchets than embroidery. You smile when you see them grease the wheel. You flinch when one of them almost drops a gear. Madeleine doesn't intervene. She just watches, like a proud, tired clockmaker who's finally let go of the key. And then she surprises you again. She asks you to redesign the bell pull system. Just a small improvement, she says. A smoother transition from the counterweight to the release hammer. It's a small thing, but it feels huge. You spend days sketching, fiddling, testing tension in the rope until your fingers blister. But when you finish, when the bell strikes after your fix, effortlessly, like breath drawn in sleep, you feel something quiet bloom in your chest. This is yours now, too. Your quirky tidbit, one record from a Florentine workshop in 1327, describes a female shadow apprentice who contributed to a major tower clock installation. Though unnamed in the records, her design tweak to the pendulum mechanism was kept in all subsequent models. Later builders simply referred to the design as the Sister's Notch. You start keeping a second journal. Not for scripture, not for dreams, for design. Measurements, adjustments, diagrams. You sketch not just the device, but how it feels. How each tick sounds on different days. How a storm tightens the echo. How the bell, even muted, still hums with invisible command. And that's when you notice something. Furious, you stopped thinking of time as something that happens. You started thinking of it as something you build. Your Odin's scholarly debate scholars still argue whether early mechanical timekeepers truly changed the perception of time, or simply reinforced older habits. Some claim that monks and nuns remained primarily tied to natural cycles and prayer rhythms. Others believe the moment these devices arrived, time began its long transformation from cosmic mystery to industrial tool. You lean toward the second, because when the bell rings now, you don't just hear it, you anticipate it. Your body responds before your brain. Your steps sync without effort. Your prayers start mid-breath, as if pre-programmed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's comfort in it. But one evening, something interrupts. You're sitting in the cloister garden, flipping through your notebook, when you hear nothing. The bell should have struck Compline. It doesn't. You look up, wait, count the seconds, still nothing. And then, faintly, off schedule by a full minute, it rings. Not sharply, not cleanly. It coughs, a clunky, wet metal thud, followed by a half-hearted chime, like someone sneezing into a cymbal. You rush to the mechanism. It's not broken. It's tired. You find wear on one of the weight wheels, grooves that have deepened too far. A pin is loose. The gear teeth are worn down like a nun's patience during Lent. It's aged. For the first time in years, you see the machine not as a symbol of progress, but as something mortal. You call the workshop team. Madeline oversees from a stool now, bundled in wool. You work all night by lantern glow. You polish, tighten, replace, and by dawn, it ticks again. But it hits you. Even this miracle is not eternal. One day, it will stop. One day, even the idea of time as you know it will evolve again. Beyond bells, beyond gears, but not yet. Now you listen to it ring once more, on time. You've grown used to being watched, not in a sinister, lurking in the corners way. It's more curious, almost reverent. Pilgrims have started visiting the abbey, not for relics or visions or some bleeding statue, but for the clock. They don't even know what to call it. Some say the time box. Others call it the prayer engine, which makes you snort. One woman simply called it the God Bell. She touched the rope like it might spark. And of course, someone always asks, does it know what time it is by itself? You shrug. Sometimes I wonder if it knows better than we do. They love that. It becomes a kind of mystical party trick. The idea that a machine can summon the sacred. People start bringing offerings. Not flowers or candles. Tools, oil, shiny bits of wire or stone. One child leaves a perfectly round pebble and whispers, "For the gears." You put it in your pocket. Your mainstream historical fact as mechanical clocks spread across Europe. Many people, especially in rural or less literate communities, attributed spiritual or magical qualities to them. Some believed the clocks contained spirits or angels. Others thought the sound of their chimes could ward off illness or evil. And now your abbey is part of that lore. You watch the visitors arrive in small clusters, their faces reflecting wonder or suspicion. They ask the same questions, over and over. How old is it? Did angels help build it? Why does it stop sometimes? You try not to sigh. Instead, you tell them the truth. It stops because we let it. This confuses them. So you explain about the contemplative bell, the intentional pause, the scheduled silence, the gap that holds space for breath and being. Some visitors scoff. Others nod slowly, as if you've just handed them a key they didn't know they needed. And yet, some are not content. They want schedules, numbers, consistency. You start noticing how many of them carry small scrolls, market times, travel maps, prayer cycles, all broken into minutes, quarter hours, half days. They live by measured light. They measure their faith. And it occurs to you, they've brought the outside clock with them. And now, for the first time, you wonder if your invention wasn't just a gift, but a seed. Something planted in the world. Something that's now growing. Your quirky tidbit in 14th century Prague. Locals believed a church tower's clock could predict the future. When it chimed 12 times during a solar eclipse, the townsfolk buried offerings beneath the tower to avoid divine punishment. Later, the mechanism was dismantled and interrogated by church officials who suspected demonic influence. You've begun dreaming of clocks now. Not yours. Others. Clocks in towers. Clocks on ships. Clocks that chime in ways you don't recognize. In your dreams, you see a future where bells sound not just for prayer, but for everything. Work, school, sleep, marriage, even birth. Time marked down to the second. Life sliced like bread into neat, digestible pieces. You wake sweaty and unsatisfied, and yet you understand why. There's power in precision, but there's also fear. The fear that once time is measured too tightly, there'll be no room left for anything unplanned. No accidents, no wandering thoughts, no sacred dawdling. And you can't help but ask yourself, did we open a door we can't close? Your open scholarly debate: did early mechanical clocks enhance spiritual life or distort it? Some argue they freed monastics from the guesswork of sun and shadow, allowing deeper focus on divine work. Others believe the machines disrupted sacred rhythm, replacing the mysteries of God with the tick of machinery. Still others argue the line between sacred and mechanical was always blurrier than we want to admit. You don't claim to have the answer, but you know this. The bell taught you discipline, and then it taught you freedom, because only when you could measure your time did you learn how to give it back. You sit now on the cloister bench, watching a family leave after their visit. The youngest child turns back at the gate and waves to the bell tower like it's a friend. You smile. Later, alone, you enter the workshop. You run your fingers over the gears. The machine hums faintly, not in sound, in presence. It's no longer just a device. It's a memory. Not just yours, everyone's. Because once, in this quiet place, time learned how to ring. It begins with a tremor. Not an earthquake, though the walls of the abbey have weathered their share of those, but a social tremor. A shift in how the outside world talks about time, about your bell, about your abbey. And you, ever the quiet observer, feel it like a draft sneaking through the cloister at dawn. People aren't just visiting anymore. They're demanding. Letters arrive, dozens, then hundreds. Requests, instructions, blueprints. Nobles want their own devices for estate halls. Bishops want versions that chime for longer, louder, more dramatically. A merchant from Florence offers a small fortune for one that includes a moon-phased dial and a market bell that rings at the start of every hour. You read the requests and seal a pinch behind your eyes. They want the bell, but not the spirit. Your mainstream historical fact: by the mid-14th century, secular interest in timekeeping surged. Towns and cities began installing complex public clocks with multiple bells, rotating dials, and animated figures. The purpose shifted from spiritual guidance to public order and commerce, a critical shift in the history of Western time. Back in your abbey, the mood is split. Some sisters are thrilled. They call it a gift from God, that the world is finally listening, that your quiet tower has become a beacon. Others are deeply uneasy. Time was once our shelter, Beatrice mutters. Now it feels like a leash. Even Sister Madeline, so often rational, so usually unshaken, begins spending more time in silence. You find her in the garden one morning, sitting by the herbs with her eyes closed. You've seen what they're doing, she says without opening them. You nod. They've built 3 more, she says. Different places, different builders, same idea. You sit beside her. Are you angry? No, she replies. just wondering how long it takes before something sacred becomes standard. And that's the tremor you feel growing. Not fear of theft, but of dilution. Your quirky tidbit. In 1370, Paris installed a clock in its city hall that not only rang on the hour, but also on the half hour. A wildly controversial move. Critics claimed it would shatter the natural flow of the soul. Supporters called it a necessary evolution for a growing metropolis. It's said the city's theologians spent 6 months debating whether half-hour chimes could be theologically justified. You wonder if your abbey will face the same. You return to your journal. The pages are fuller now, worn with use, dotted with notes, diagrams, smudges from oily fingers and midnight thoughts. But lately, the entries have grown philosophical. You write, "We gave the world a bell. We meant to remind it of prayer. Instead, it remembered power. And I do not regret the invention, but I missed the silence that used to come after." The contemplative bell has changed too. It still rings, but now, visitors stop, not in reverence, but confusion. They ask, "What's this one for?" You try to explain. They nod politely, then check their pocket sundials or miniature water clocks and move on. That's your open scholarly debate. Some argue that contemplative time, free, unscheduled, sacred pause, is the first casualty of mechanical time. Others insist that even in the most scheduled world, intentional silence can survive. The question remains, can you teach someone to value time they can't measure? One night, you can't sleep, not from anxiety, from longing. So you sneak to the workshop and light a single candle. The gears gleam faintly in the flicker. You run your fingers along the edges. You know every dent, every groove, every stubborn knot in the cord. It has been years, but it still feels like home. And something inside you decides you want to build one more. Not for the city, not for profit, for no one, for yourself. A small one. No tower, no chimes, just ticking. A whisper of time, something humble, something hidden. You begin sketching it on a scrap of waxed parchment. You call it the soul clock. It will keep no schedule. It will never ring. It will simply remind. And you realize the journey doesn't just end with the bell. It continues with what you choose to listen for in between. The ticking never really ends, but you can still choose when to pause. The bell rings softer now, not because the mechanism is failing. If anything, it's in the best condition of its life. The younger sisters have taken to its care like swans to water. They've polished every cog, recalibrated the weights, even invented a new method for measuring gear tension using dyed wax strings and an impossibly delicate feather scale. No, the bell is softer because you asked for it, not out loud, not formally, but in the choices you've made, the late-night adjustments, the slightly longer pauses, the hours you've encouraged the novices to feel before measuring. And they listened. You hear it now, the deliberate space between chimes, the thoughtful hesitation before the rope release, the sigh the machine seems to take before it declares, "This is now." You are older, not ancient, not infirm, but your knees take their time rising from prayer. Your hands carry the tremble of someone who has held too much. Ink, rope, tools, sorrow, wonder. You don't go up the tower as often, but when you do, you linger. And today you linger long. Your mainstream historical fact in time, as public clocks multiplied. The world shifted toward an unprecedented level of synchronicity. Work hours, travel timetables, military operations, all began to dance to the rhythm of mechanical time. By the 15th century, timekeeping was no longer a curiosity. It was infrastructure. It was truth. And yet here, in your quiet abbey, truth feels softer, more optional. Because you've found the balance. You've kept the bell honest, but not tyrannical. The contemplative bell still chimes, now at irregular intervals. Sometimes midday, sometimes twice before dawn. Once, by accident, or maybe grace, it rang during a funeral, and no one moved for a full 5 minutes. They said it was the most peaceful grief they'd ever felt. Sister Madeline has passed, quietly in her sleep, during a rainstorm so gentle the droplets sounded like whispers on stone. Her last words were, "Make sure they clean the escapement this time." You laughed through your tears. Her grave is beneath the fig tree, the same one where she once explained that obedient was never meant to mean lifeless. Now the tree shades your bench. You sit there often, scribbling thoughts, sometimes with words, sometimes just little clock diagrams shaped like flowers. Your quirky tidbit: in 15th century Nuremberg, a clockmaker once constructed a device that chimed a lullaby instead of an hourly tone. It never caught on commercially, but it was rumored that the craftsman refused to build anything else afterward. He said, "Time should invite sleep, not labor." You find that beautiful. You wonder what your invention invites. Because yes, it spread. Cities now echo with bells. Merchants strike deals by them. Children race them. Lovers kiss beneath their clang. And still, every one of those clocks carries something of yours. You and your sisters. Not the parts, the pause. That small sliver of the divine that whispers, "Wait. Breathe." This too is time. Your open scholarly debate. Even now, historians argue whether the nuns of your abbey invented the first true mechanical clock, or whether others elsewhere did it simultaneously. There are debates over records, surviving parts, local myths, but in the end, the question remains, is invention about being first or being felt the longest? You don't care about being first. You care that it rung, and rang true. Now you sit at your table, sketching the final pieces of your soul clock. It's almost done. The escapement is feathered for silence. The balance weight shaped like a seed. It will never chime, but it will tick, softly, gently, enough for one heart. Yours. Maybe one day someone will find it. Maybe not. That's not the point. The point is you knew when to stop counting. Because the bell isn't what makes the time sacred. You are. Your presence. Your stillness. Your choice to listen or not. The machine can measure minutes, but only you can make them matter. So now, let the bell fade. Its chime echoes into memory, soft and distant, like the final light sliding down a chapel wall. The ticking slows, not because it's broken, but because you've let it rest. And in that hush, something deeper emerges. A rhythm without gears. A breath you don't rush. You're sitting beneath the fig tree again, only this time you're not alone. The shadows stretch long but gently. The air is cool, and the birds sing as if they've known this peace forever. The bell no longer commands you. It joins you. You move when you're ready. You listen when you wish. The world beyond may chime itself into endless order, into trains and meetings and profit. But here you remember. Before the bell, there was silence. Before the gears, there was grace. And now you know how to carry both. So close your eyes. Let the sound of that first chime, so long ago, so bright and trembling, carry you into sleep. Let it hold you, not in command, but in kindness. Let it remind you that even in the most ordered life, there is room for pause, for softness, for dreams. The world can keep its clocks, You, my friend, have found your own time, and it is perfectly, beautifully yours. End of story. Sweet dreams.